All right, what's up, everyone? Today I'm going back to my roots. I'm playing around with some Nuxt Auth. I'm in need of a full stack app. But to make this exciting, I decided to use raw SQL, specifically Postgres, rather than an ORM like a Prisma, something of that nature. I'm just personally tired of learning the syntax of the latest ORM, and so I'm actually going to take a step back and play around with some Postgres and see where it takes me. So without further ado, let's get going. So I'm going to create a new application. What is it? npx nuxt init. Let's say next auth Postgres. We'll use pnpm. Okay, let's go ahead and go in and let's get started. Cool. So here we have with just a good old basic Nuxt app. And we're going to need a couple of dependencies. So let's go ahead and start with, we're actually going to need a bunch. So we use auth/core sitebase/Nuxt Auth. And we're going to use next-auth and Postgres. And then we're also going to be using one called pgmg. And if you're new to this channel, ni is just shorthand for example, this would be pnpm install. All right, looks like we got everything. Cool. So let's go ahead and start with our authentication endpoint. We're going to go to create two new directories, API, and then within it auth, and then we're going to create a ts. And so this is going to be our auth endpoint, where we can then do an export default next auth handler. Cool. And so where this comes from, I almost forgot. We need to go into our Nuxt config, and we're going to want to add in our Sitebase Nuxt Auth module. And yeah, we'll come back to this file later. But for now, interesting. I'm not sure why it doesn't want to import or auto import, but let's see. Maybe I just need to reload. There we go. Oh, let me just double check. Everything looks good. Oh, we want this to be 0.5. Next, view order. All right, cool. Looks like everything figured itself out. The key might have been changing. We do explicitly want this next auth version. We do not want the latest. They explain it in the Nuxt Auth documentation, but I don't remember exactly why. So just trust me on that one. Okay, and then what we're gonna do here is for secret, we'll just say our super duper secret. And then we're going to want an adapter, and we'll deal with this soon. And we're going to want providers. Cool. So the providers we're going to use in this application, I'm just going to use the GitHub providers just because it's pretty easy to get set up. And yeah, so let's go ahead. Interesting. I'm also not getting auto imports here, but we're going to want to import this specifically from next-auth. And then we're also going to want to say, just so this stops yelling at us, expect error. And then we're going to do two things, client ID and client secret. So I'm not going to explain how to get these. Just look up GitHub OAuth. I think even next-auth shows how you're going to want to do it. But what I am going to show you is how I'm going to use it once I have it. And so we're going to use runtime config, which is just Nuxt's standard for managing environment variables. We're going to go over to our Nuxt config now, and we're going to do runtime config. I'm going to call these client ID, and this comes from process.env.clientID, and we're also going to do GitHub client secret. Okay, if you're not familiar where these come from, typically you have just like a .env file, and you're going to have both of these set to whatever the secret value is. For the sake of this application, I have two already set up. Don't bother using them because I will eliminate these prior to releasing this video, but if you're curious, this is what it'll look like. Cool, so now we have our Nuxt config, and now we should be able to do a runtime config dot, interesting, I'm getting some TypeScript errors, I think, but this should have just auto completed, but I guess not. So we're gonna get that one, and then this one. Great. So now we should be all set for OAuth. This is not production ready, in case this wasn't obvious. You're also gonna want a, I think it's like a SHA-256, like a very unique, hard to decrypt code that eventually goes in here. Again, it's in the docs. I recommend reading it over. Well, actually, I guess for that one I can do next-auth secret. Cool, and so for this particular secret, we're actually going to want to run this code, which will give us a super duper actual real secret. And so we're going to do the same thing. We'll go into our .env, and we'll say Nuxt, and we'll just call it auth secret equals here. And so we're going to pull this, and in our runtime config, grab it. Cool. And now instead of this silliness, we can do runtime config.auth secret. Now it should be super secure. We're going to want one more thing before we get actually into like the front end. And that's kind of where things get a little tricky to explain, but I'll try my best. So what we're going to do here for adapters is we're going to use something that I created. And so this is going to be, we're going to put this in our, I just created a utils directory. And within this, we're going to want something called Postgres.js adapter.ts. And I'm going to just throw in a ton of code. And so that's kind of why I said it would be hard to explain. But what I've done here is I've created a an adapter that is basically a carbon copy of their Postgres adapter. And so here is Postgres adapter that next-auth recommends in their docs if you're going to use Postgres. The reason I don't like this is it actually relies on Node Postgres. And I actually prefer just Postgres. So this is Postgres.js that I prefer. Oops. And so this is just kind of personal preference. If you like to use Node Postgres, if you prefer Node Postgres, then just use the built-in like Postgres adapter right here. But if you like Postgres.js, use what I posted. I did create a PR here. So I did create a PR for this code change, so hopefully it becomes like an official part of the next-auth code base. But it probably won't, just judging by all the PRs that are taking place. There's a handful of adapters. So just keep in mind that that is how I'm approaching this and what I'll be using moving forward. This entire code base will be open sourced. I'm not really going to go into this. Honestly, it's kind of gross and the TypeScript is not great. But the key difference is just like the specific SQL syntax that the Postgres adapter is using versus a Postgres.js adapter. And so what we're going to want here is we're going to just copy this. We'll do adapter, Postgres.js adapter. And we can import it. And so now if we look into this, this is expecting this PostgreSQL. And so that's going to come from our Postgres library. But the way I like to handle this is actually in a separate DB utils. So we're going to import Postgres from Postgres. And here we're going to actually create like this SQL Postgres object that is going to be reusable throughout all of our server endpoints. And so we're going to specify the database name. I'm going to call this, what is the name of this project? Nuxt Auth Postgres. And then one key addition we need here is also this transform. And so this is going to transform undefined into null values within our database. This is just one thing I noticed that needed to take place to actually make this adapter work, at least for my implementation. I'm sure it could be tweaked in a way where it doesn't need to happen, but I'm just trying to make stuff. So last thing we do is export it. Cool. And now we can do this. We do SQL and let's import it. I'm also going to do this tsexpect error. There is like user specific issues, but I don't think that's adapter related because the same issue occurs with the Postgres adapter. Okay, sorry, I know that was a lot of stuff, but now we should be set up, at least next-auth related. One thing I forgot to mention is this database has to exist. This implementation will not create the database for you. So multiple things. You do need Postgres to be downloaded and you need the database to exist. So for this one, we're going to do Nuxt Auth. So in order to create this, we're actually just going to copy here and you should have Postgres downloaded and you can do create DB, Nuxt Auth Postgres. Easy. Cool. Now, our backend should be set up. And let's go ahead and play with it. So first thing we're going to do is script setup, laying TS. And we're going to pull out a couple things. We want data, sign in, and sign out from our use auth hook. And so this is coming from Nuxt Auth. And then what we should be able to do here is I'm going to want a couple of buttons. In fact, I want two. We're going to do sign in, or actually we'll do sign out. sign in, and we're going to want some pre. This is going to be our data. Now, we can do, so this data object, we should be able to see, so there's data expires, user, and information specific to this user. And basically what I want to check in this implementation is like, is the user logged in? So one way to do that is to say data user. Basically, does the user exist? If it does, you're logged in. And so that's how Nuxt Auth kind of checks logged in versus logged out. And so if you're logged in, sign out. Otherwise, so if else, we can safely assume you're logged out. Let's give them the ability to log in. Oops, we don't want that. Sign out. So I think it actually wants that. So on click. So one additional thing we want here though is GitHub, because if you remember, we're using the GitHub provider. So instead of having to go to like the ugly Nuxt Auth like login page, I like to just bypass that. So there is actually one key thing I forgot, and that is we've created the database, but we haven't created any form of structure for the database. And so that's where this package pgmg comes in. So pgmg is a simple Postgres.js migration library. There's really only a handful of JavaScript if you want to see how it's handled. But I know it's all, I don't know, I like it. This is the structure of the migrations. We have name, description, transaction, what occurs within that migration. And I'll show you how to run it in a sec. So what we want to do here is we want this, the schema for Postgres database, that next-auth. Well, let's make sure it's, here we go. Oh, it links here anyways. So we want the schema for Postgres that next-auth assumes. And so this is everything. We want to run this in SQL. So the way I've been doing this is migrations, and then I like to number my migrations. I'll call it auth init, and then we're gonna just do JavaScript. So for now, let's just throw this in here. So all the SQL code, and then we're gonna go back, and so we're gonna throw all of this SQL code, and then we're gonna do a couple of things. So we're gonna do a name, and so we're gonna just call this like the name of the migration, and we'll just call this auth init. And then we're gonna do export const description, and so this is just a description of what this migration does. So I'll just say creates initial database structure to work alongside next-auths. Oops, next-auths expected Postgres. What do they call this? Postgres schema. Cool. So these are just kind of niceties that explain the migration. The majority of the work occurs here in this next function. So this is called action, and it takes SQL, and we're going to take all of the SQL here, and we're going to pass, so it's pass SQL, which is I don't know exactly how, but it's hooked into this SQL specific to our Postgres.js SQL object, and then we use these two. We're going to use this syntax, and I know it's a lot, but I personally think SQL is very really easy to read, honestly. I mean, the beauty of it is it's universal, whether it's Postgres or SQLite or MySQL. Once you kind of learn to understand it, it's universal, and the knowledge carries over from relationship database to relationship database. Whereas like my personal struggle is, 1 month I might learn Prisma, a couple months later I have to learn Drizzle, and then a couple months later I'm doing something or other. And I don't find that very enjoyable. It's just learning the same thing over and over again to solve the same problem, just in a slightly different way. So I'm going to try this project out with just raw SQL and kind of see where it takes me. Okay, so anyways, we have all of this SQL. How do we run it? So I like to do a dbmigrate command within my package.json. We're going to do pgmg, which is the migration package, and then you actually need your Postgres database URL. So in my case, it's going to be localhost 5432, and then I called it Nuxt.auth Postgres. And then you want one more thing, which is migration /star.js. Oops, star.js. And so this is pgmg is the library. Here's my Postgres database. And then migrations is connected to this migrations directory. And then the star.js is just kind of like a wildcard, so it'll run through every migration file that you have. So this could also just be o1 auth init, but this would just, eventually I'll have 2, 3, 4 migrations, and so the star is just a better way of doing it, I think. Just one key is you're going to, if the migration order matters, just make sure you name them in a way where it orders them as expected. So in this case, I'd do, the next one would probably be O2, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you could get a lot more creative with this, but at least for my use case, it works just fine. So let's go ahead and run this. So I'll do a nr dbmigrate. Okay, so it actually didn't like the star. Just for the sake of this video, I'm just going to manually run this individual file. But I'm sure in the future I'll create a slightly more dynamic way so I don't have to manually specify the file that I want to migrate. Or maybe not. Maybe this is fine. Not really sure yet. But it also didn't like this. So when I ran this migration file, what I did was I tried to stuff every SQL command into a single SQL call. Turns out that's not allowed. So unfortunately, what I have to do is break this up. So I'm going to just do this. Sometimes being manual is just the way you gotta do it. Cool. Okay. Now, let's try that again. Migration complete. Cool. So I'm not quite the command line wizard that I wish I was. So what I do to kind of verify is I will use table plus to just kind of validate through an interface what I expect to see, right? And so here we're gonna say Nuxt, what did I call this? Postgres. And then so everything is default, at least for my implementation, except for here. And let's go ahead and connect. And here we go. Cool. So this is the structure of the database that was created running this migration file. All right. Now let's just run our web server. So I'm just gonna try a fresh install. Let's just make sure. Yeah, okay, that's what's going on. So my next-auth is at a 4.24.7, but I actually need a 4.2. So what I need to do is actually, I think, delete the lock file. And I just need to make sure that my next-auth is at a 422.5. Yeah, things are all kind of weird. All right, let me also delete my node modules. So what I'm gonna do, I think, is none next-auth. And just make sure, here we go, I get the exact next-auth version. Cool. There we go. So I think it was just some PNPM stuff, frankly, some caching that was taking place. But that should be good to go. We now should be running our server just fine. Okay, let's go here. All right, so all we see is a sign in button, to be expected. So remember, if we go to our app, we see a sign in because we're not logged in. But when I click this, it's gonna hit GitHub OAuth, and it should, oh, did not like that. Session token does not exist. Column session token does not exist. So let's go ahead and try that again. Oh. Uh-oh, why am I logged in now? Okay, let's try that again, sign in. There we go. Okay, so I'm not entirely sure what happened. It looked like I just needed to run my migration file again. So if you see that session token does not exist, just make sure you ran your migration. So anyways, now we're logged in. This is me. So this is my GitHub information. If I sign out, sign in, and all that jazz. So now if we look at our database, I'm just going to reset my database, and let's go ahead and try that. Okay, migration complete. Let's look back at my database. Cool. Okay, that's all valid. Let's sign in with GitHub. Okay. Oh, I see what's going on. Okay, hold on. So I think I have to be on that particular port. So let's just make sure we're on localhost 3000. And let's go back. There we go. Okay, now we can see our user. And that's me. So I think I'm not entirely sure why there's a dependency on localhost 3000. I have a feeling that's probably a built-in on Sidebase. let's just say port. I have a feeling there's a default on port 3000 that it redirects to using OAuth. I'm sure this is configurable. But yeah, so that's kind of where a lot of this pain was coming from, actually. So sorry about that. All right. I know it's been a very long video, but I hope I hope you find some value out of this. This was, I understand it's kind of a little against the grain. I'm not just hooking into Prisma or some just like pre-made library. But something the Primogen said kind of stuck with me, in that when you start using these abstractions, something like a Prisma, you're no longer writing code, you're writing Prisma code. And so when you run into bugs that are Prisma related, it can be very frustrating. And I've ran into that enough times where it's like, okay, I'm going to take a step back. Instead of just like putting Lego pieces together and building apps using all of these ready available tools, I'm trying to go a little bit more back to like the lower level of things and you know, write, like have a little less abstraction in my code. So anyways, I'll put all of this on GitHub. If you are interested, it'll be there. Also, I would love it if you were to check out that pull request. You know, there's a lot of type errors taking place here. I think specific to like this adapter user that it's expecting. But anyways, yeah, so that was auth. Super hacky Postgres.js auth, but this is probably going to be my go-to moving forward. So if you do enjoy my videos, like I'm probably going to be referencing to this one quite a bit. Anyways, hope you enjoyed. Take care.